The same religion that's capable of hideous acts of destruction can also be capable of moments of healing, of restoration, and of hope.
But educate a girl, and you educate her entire family.
There is a sun within every person.
When that anger sets in, write it. Write the letters, but don't send them. You never want to leave concrete proof of insanity.
Good evening. As director of the Interdisciplinary Humanities Center at UCSB, it is my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's event, which is being co-presented by the IHC, UCSB Arts and Lectures, and the Writing Program. Before introducing our speaker, please allow me to make another very important introduction. Tonight is the inaugural event of a new humanities initiative on campus. Thanks to a generous gift from Diana and Simon Raab, a new writer-in-residence program has been created to bring a distinguished author to the UCSB campus each year for the next several years. The concept and spirit of the Diana and Simon Raab Writer-in-Residence program reflect Diana Raab's own commitment to the craft of writing. An award-winning author, Diana Raab has published 8 books, including Healing with Words, A Writer's Cancer Journey, and Regina's Closet, Finding My Grandmother's Secret Journal. Diana Raab is also an accomplished poet. Her most recent volume, Lust, appeared this past February. She has edited 2 anthologies, Writers on the Edge, about addiction and dependency, and Writers and Their Notebooks. The Writer-in-Residence program directly reflects Diana Raab's appreciation of writing as a tool for recording the events of a person's life and also as a means of making an impact on the very course of life itself. On behalf of the campus, I would like to extend a heartfelt thank you to Diana and Simon Raab for their gift, which will enable our community, and especially our students, to engage with some of the very best contemporary practitioners of the craft of writing. And we have one of the absolute best in our midst this evening. Born in Leningrad, Gary Shteyngart moved to the United States when he was 7 years old. He is a graduate of Oberlin College, where he studied politics, and of Hunter College of the City University of New York, where he earned an MFA in creative writing. Currently, Gary Shteyngart teaches writing at Columbia University. He has published 4 books that have propelled him into the literary spotlight. The Russian Debutante's Handbook, published in 2002, Absurdistan, published in 2006, which was chosen as one of the 10 best books of the year by the New York Times Book Review and Time Magazine, and Super Sad True Love Story, which appeared in 2010 and won the Bollinger Everyman Wodehouse Prize for comic literature. Super Sad Love Story was also selected as one of the best books of the year by more than 40 news journals and magazines around the world. His most recent book, the memoir Little Failure, appeared earlier this year to resounding acclaim. Gary Shteyngart publishes regularly in The New Yorker, The New York Times, Slate, and Granta, and the current issue of Travel and Leisure includes an article he wrote about the best new restaurants in the LA Basin. A compatriot of Gary Shteyngart's, emigre Vladimir Nabokov, once stated that his novel Lolita was the record of his love affair with the English language. As was the case with Nabokov, English is not Gary Shteyngart's mother tongue. In view of this fact, the trenchant and satiric observations on American life Shteyngart offers are that much more astonishing, and they are a testament to his ear for the diverse cadences of American life, to his engagement with so many facets of that life, and to his capacity to imbibe the polyphony of American vernacular and culture, as only an attentive lover can. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Gary Shteyngart. Please join me now in welcoming him to the stage.
Thank you. Wow, thank you. It is so nice to be here in sunny Santa Barbara. Yeah, UCSB. I haven't had your tacos yet, but I hear Super Rica is the place that... I knew that would get you going, yeah. And thank you so much to Diana Raab for having this. I have never inaugurated anything before, so I'm not sure I'm up to that challenge, but I'll try. I'll read a little bit from my latest, and then you can voice your concerns about what I've read. The new memoir, my only memoir, is called Little Failure, and critics have unanimously agreed that the best thing about it is the cover, clearly. I don't know if you can see it, but essentially it's a little boy about to cry in a car. And the year is 1974. This is Leningrad, USSR. And what they had back then was they would take a child and dress him in a sailor's outfit for reasons I still can't understand. And they would put them in front of the latest of Soviet technology, in this case, a Studebaker. Within this book there's a wealth of photos, including me crying in other settings. For example, in front of a telephone, another example of the latest in Soviet technology in 1974. Unlike most young boys, I'm not even touching the wheel of this car. I'm sort of sitting there like that, you know. And it took me up to this year, when I turned 41, to finally learn how to drive. So watch out, Santa Barbara. Seriously, watch out. I'm a terrible, terrible driver. The book is really about how I became a writer, and people often ask me, you know, how do you become a writer? I teach at a Master's of Fine Arts program in creative writing, and there's about 460 programs like that now in America. We can't stop writing. We don't want to read, but we can't stop writing. So there's a couple of things I think you need to do. First, you have to be asthmatic to be a writer. No way around that. You gotta have asthma. So I would grow up in a cold, damp place like Leningrad, which is actually built over a swamp, which is perfect. And in 1974, there were no steroid inhalers in Russia, so you really got to see mortality up close as a child, because you were always about to die, you know. One of the first things I remember was just the wail of the ambulances coming through the courtyard to take me away. And one of the most, I've been on a book tour for the last 4 years or so, and one of the nicest things has been people bringing me their asthma inhalers to sign. I think that's really sweet. Seattle seems to be a place where everyone is slowly suffering from asthma. The second thing you gotta have is a grandmother who loves how to write. My grandmother, Galia, was a journalist for a paper called Evening Leningrad, which is a much better paper than Morning Leningrad, just sort of the TMZ of Soviet socialist papers. And one day when I was about 5 years old, she said to me, "Hey, asthma boy, you know, you want to be a novelist?" And I said, "All right." And she said, "I'll give you a piece of cheese for each page you write." And my God, I love this cheese, this almost plasticky yellow Soviet cheese they had in the store. And right outside of our window was the biggest statue of Lenin in Leningrad. I'm talking huge, you know. We called him the Latin Lenin because he looked like he was always about to rumba. And each morning when I wasn't dying from asthma, I'd get up and I'd hug his pedestal. I really loved that guy. So my first book was called Lenin and His Magical Goose, the novel I wrote for my grandma. And in it, Lenin meets a goose, possibly from Armenia or Georgia, someplace warm. and together they invade Finland and try to create a socialist revolution. One of the first pictures of me in this book is, here's, again, 5 years old. This is when I'm about to start writing my first novel. I'm again dressed in that sailor suit I don't understand why I have. And I'm reading this gigantic Talmudic-sized book on the Soviet Revolution of 1917. So this was, every 5-year-old boy in Leningrad was obsessed with the Revolution of 1917. Sort of like Beanie Babies, but. So in my book, they invade Finland, and things go well. The Finns are easy to conquer. But then they get into a huge fight, Lenin and the goose, because the goose is Menshevik, and Lenin is, of course, Bolshevik. So in the end, Lenin eats the goose. But not before we learn that Lenin also is an asthma sufferer, just like me. And my grandmother, being a good communist that she was, she really loved it. She paid me 100 pieces of cheese for 100 pages of this book. Fun fact, even today, Random House pays me in cheese. Gigantic wheels of cheese that I sell out of the back of a van in Brooklyn. If you're ever in Williamsburg, I have a very trendy hipster cheese van. But I remember my grandmother saying, okay, fine, he eats the goose, but maybe instead of eating him, he exiles him to Mexico, and ice pick. So then we emigrated to America, and I had to leave Lenin behind, and I had to learn English and also some Hebrew, because I was sentenced to 8 years of Hebrew school for a crime I didn't commit. And 1980 was a difficult time to be a Russian in America. Many of you may remember Ronald Reagan's Evil Empire speech, and there were all those movies, Red Dawn, Red Gerbil, Red Hamster, everything was red. And I pretended to the kids in Hebrew school that I was actually born in East Berlin, not in Leningrad. So things are bad when you have to convince Jewish kids that you're actually a German. Plus, we were really poor. I had one shirt and one pair of pants and a bunch of T-shirts the parents of the kids in Hebrew school had donated. And my toys were a pen, and a Chewbacca action figure someone had given us that was missing half of its paw. And I had from Russia a fur coat and a fur hat made out of some woodland animal. And the teachers would actually take me aside and say, you really need to get rid of your fur. Kids will play with you more if you're furless. Just true in adulthood as well. And then 2 years after we left Russia, something truly incredible happened that almost changed our lives forever. And I'll read you a section of the book. In 1981, an official letter arrives in our mailbox. Mr. S. Shteyngart, you have already won $10 million. Sure, our last name is misspelled rather cruelly, but cardstock this thick does not lie. And the letter is from a major American publisher, to wit, the Publishers Clearing House. I opened the letter with shaking hands, and a check flutters out. Paid to the order of S. Shteyngart, $10 million and 00/$100. Our lives are about to change. I run down the stairs into the courtyard of our cheap apartment complex. Mama, Papa, we won. Мы миллионеры, we are millionaires now. Calm down, my father says. Do you want another asthma attack? But he is nervous and excited himself. Around the glowing surface of the orange dining table imported from Romania, we spread around the contents of the voluminous packet. For 2 years, we have been good new citizens, accidentally watching X-rated movies on Main Street with titles like Emmanuel, Tales of a Woman, getting jobs as engineers and clerk typists. My mother's pianist fingers will finally be put to meaningful use. Learning to pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of American, and for the something for which that it stands, unavoidable, with money for all. Боже мой, my mother says, my God, as we look at the pictures on the envelope of a Mercedes flying off the deck of our yacht toward our new mansion with its Olympic-sized swimming pool. Oi, does it have to be a Mercedes? Pfft, Nazis. Don't worry, we can trade for a Cadillac. The way I understand it, the house doesn't come with the prize. The prize is just 10 million, and then we can buy the house separately. Pfft, they always say here, sold separately. You can forget about the yacht, Gary, it's dangerous. But I know how to swim, Mama. How do you keep the pool open in the winter? Snow will get in. Look, there are palm trees on the envelope. Maybe it's in Florida. Florida won't be good for your asthma with all that humidity. I want to live in Miami, Mommy. Maybe there aren't Hebrew schools in Miami. Everywhere in America, there are Hebrew schools. We sit down and using our collective 400-word English vocabulary, begin to unravel the many documents before us. Wait, it says here that, yes, we have already won the $10 million, no disputing that, but a panel of judges still has to award the money to us. First, we must fill out the so-called winner's form and to select 5 national magazines that will be sent to us free, or at least the first issue of each will be free, and then the Americans will likely send us the rest of the $10 million. Fair enough. First, we must acclimate to our new wealth, expand our literacy. I am proud of Papa's new car, a bulbous 1977 Chevrolet Malibu Classic with only 7 million miles on the odometer. But it's time to get acquainted with the finer autos. So I order car and motor, motor and driver, carburetor and driver, muffler and owner. And for the last selection, something that maybe has my Star Wars monkey, Chewie Chewbacca, in it, Isaac Asimov's science fiction magazine. The Publishers Clearinghouse. I walk solemnly to the mailbox with its envelope and deposit our claim on the future. Adonai Eloheinu, I pray to our new God, please help us get the $10 million so that Mama and Papa will not fight so much and there will be no razvod, divorce between them. And let us live somewhere far away from Papa's wolfish relatives who cause all the trouble. And let them not yell at Mama when she sends the money Papa says we don't have to her sisters and her grandmother Galia in Leningrad, who has been dying for a very long time. Amen. That night in my dreams, I walk into the Solomon Schechter School of Queens, a multimillionaire. And the pretty girl with the big teeth who's always tan from her Florida vacation kisses me with those big teeth. I haven't gotten the mechanics of kissing down yet. The kids make fun of Jonah Himmelstein, the school's biggest loser, but I say, hey, he's my friend now. Here is $2. Buy us both the Carvel Flying Saucer cookie ice cream and keep the change, you garnished, you nothing. We find out the truth quickly and brutally. At their respective workplaces, my parents are told that the Publishers Clearinghouse regularly sends out that you have already won $10 million envelope, and that these are routinely thrown into the trash by the savvy native born. Depression settles over our non-millionaire shoulders. In Russia, the government was constantly telling us lies. Wheat harvest is up. Uzbek baby goats give milk at an all-time high. Soviet crickets learned to sing the Internationale in honor of Brezhnev's visit to a local hayfield. But we could not imagine that they would lie to our faces like that. Here, in America, the land of the this and the home of the that. And so we don't give up hope entirely. The judges are probably reading our application right now. Maybe I should write them a letter in my burgeoning English. Dear Publishers Clearinghouse, spring is here, the weather is warm and rainy, birds come from the south to sing songs. My mother's pianist fingers hurt very much from the typing, and she has only one suit for work. Please send us $10 million immediately. We love you, Family Shteyngart. Meanwhile, Car and Parking and all the other Publishers Clearinghouse magazines are starting to pile up, taunting us with the many hot, naked centerfolds of the new Porsche 911, the official sports coupe of Reagan-era excess. We reluctantly begin to cancel our subscription to all of them except for Asimov's science fiction magazine, a small, square little number with the drawing of an exciting, molting space creature on the cover, hugging a boy just like me in its claws. Our dreams of being instantly rich are finished, but we are moving up nonetheless. We are saving every kopeck that comes our way via my father's junior engineering job and my mother's typing. Here's the inventory of our possessions. I have my pen, my broken Chewbacca monkey, my recently circumcised penis, my Soviet atlas, and a bunch of donated t-shirts. My mother has her size 2 Harve Bernard business suit. My father has made a fishing rod out of a stick. Pounds of disgusting marked-down farmer's cheese and kasha will feed us until we die of sadness. And if I don't clear my plate of that warm, soggy crap, the thunderclap of Papa's hand rings against my temple, my mother yelling, "Just don't hit his head! He has to earn money with his head." Or Mama's week-long silent treatment will make me consider taking my own life altogether. Who are we? Parents, мы бедные, we are poor folk. Me, why can't I have the Chewbacca with both paws? Parents, oh, both paws, we are not Americans. But you both have jobs now. Parents, we have to buy a house. Yes, a house, the first step to Americanism. Who needs the 2-pawed Chewie when we will soon have our own quasi-suburban home? But at lunchtime, the Hebrew school boys do like to take out their Lukes and Obi-Wans and Yodas and set them on their desks to demonstrate just how much property falls within their purview. They talk in their already raspy Jewish voices. I threw out my old Yoda because the paint on his ears was falling off, and then I got 2 new ones and a Princess Leia just so Ham Solo could do her. Me, amazed. Wow. I wrote Lenin and His Magical Goose because I wanted all that Soviet cheese, but I also wanted my grandmother to love me. And that was the easiest way to get her love. And so a terrible connection was forged in my mind that writing novels somehow equals love. What was I thinking? I mean, today most novelists are not loved at all. I gave a reading at a university a few years ago, and I'm not going to mention the University of Oklahoma by name, but a student there said, "Excuse me, Mr. Shteyngart, how do I know when a book's been fictionated?" And I said, "What?" She said, "You know, like when it's not true, because I only like things that are true." And I said, "Well, usually it says novel on it or stories, or something like that." And she said, "Well, thank you. I'm going to avoid those from now on because I want things to be true." And anyway, I'm proud to have my first non-fictionated book out there. But back to my life after not winning the Publishers Clearing House sweepstakes. Because I was the red gerbil, the second most hated boy at Hebrew school, I thought, what if I wrote a science fiction novel and showed it to the kids in school? Maybe they'll learn to like me. And some of these examples still exist. My parents were sweet enough to save all of them. Hundreds of pages of little child scrawl. This one called Invasion from Outer Space. Let's look at the first chapter. Chapter 1, Something is Wrong. And indeed there was, Why didn't somebody call child services? And then when I was about 11 years old, something momentous happened in the guise of a substitute teacher called Miss S. And I'll read you that section of it. On one of her first days on the job, Miss S asked all of us to bring in our favorite items in the world and to explain why they make us who we are. I bring in my latest toy, a dysfunctional Apollo rocket whose capsule pops off with the press of a lever, but only under certain atmospheric conditions. The humidity must be below 54%, and explain that I have even written my own novel. This passes largely unremarked as the latest batch of Star Wars X-Wing fighters and My Little Ponies are paraded around. Finally, Miss S holds up a sneaker and explains that her favorite activity is jogging. "P.U., a boy cries out, pointing at the sneaker and holding his nose, and everyone except me laughs their wicked child laugh. I am shocked. Here is a young, kind, pretty teacher, and the children are intimating that her feet smell. Only me and my 200-pound Leningrad fur are allowed to smell around here." I look to Miss S, so worried that she will cry, but instead she laughs and then goes on about how running makes her feel good. After we have all finished explaining who we are, Miss S calls me over to her desk. "You really wrote a novel?" she says. "Yes," I say. It is called The Challenge." "May I read it?" "Yes, you may read it. I will brink it." And brink it I do, with the worried admonition, "Please don't lose Miss S, okay?" And then it happens. At the end of the English period, when a book about a mouse who has learned how to fly in an airplane has been thoroughly dissected, Miss S announces, "And now Gary will read from his novel." His what? Oh, but it doesn't matter because I'm standing there holding my composition notebook straight from the Square Deal notebook people of Dayton, Ohio, zip code 45463. And looking out at me are the boys beneath their little flying saucer yarmulkes, and the girls with their sweet aromatic bangs, their blouses studded with stars. And there's Miss S, who I'm already terribly in love with, who I recently learned has a fiance. Not sure what that means, can't be good. But whose bright American face is not just encouraging me, but priding me on. Am I scared? No, I am eager to begin my life. Introduction, I say. The mysterious race. Before the age of dinosaurs, there was human life on Earth. They looked just like the man of today, but they were a lot more intelligent than the man of today. Slowly, Miss S says. Read slowly, Gary. Let us enjoy the words. I breathe that in. Miss S wants to enjoy my words. And then I continue slower. They built all kinds of spaceships and other wonders, but at that time the Earth circled the moon because the moon was bigger than the Earth. One day a gigantic comet came and blew up the moon to the size it is today. As I'm reading it, I'm hearing a different language come out of my mouth. I do full justice to the many misspellings and errors the Earth circled the moon, and the Russian accent is still thick, but I am speaking in what is more or less comprehensible English. And as I am speaking, along with my strange new English voice, I'm also hearing something entirely foreign to the squealing and shouting that constitutes the background noise of my Hebrew school. Silence. The children are silent. They are listening to my every word. And they will listen to the story for the next 5 weeks as well, because Miss S will designate the end of every English period as Gary Novel Time. And they will shout out throughout the English period, when will Gary read already? The school is close to Long Island. Yeah. And I will sit there in my chair, oblivious to all but Miss S.'s smile, excused from following the discussion of the mouse who learned how to fly, so that I may go over the words I will soon read to my adoring audience. And God bless these kids for giving me a chance. May their God bless them, everyone. Thank you. So, in the meantime, because most Soviet immigrants are quite conservative, I've subscribed to another little magazine called the National Review. William F. Buckley Jr., editor. Margaret Thatcher on the cover, or on every cover. And then I am sent a thick card featuring an American eagle sitting upon 2 rifles. That's right, Gary Shteyngart, age 11, is being welcomed into the National Rifle Association. Can't start too soon with the Second Amendment. My Soviet republicanism flourished even as I left the provinces of eastern Queens and ended up at Stuyvesant High School, which is a kind of holding pen for multinational math and science nerds in Manhattan. And then my political allegiances underwent a change, and this is how it happened. On Election Day 1988, I come to the Marriott Marquis Ballroom thinking this is the day I will finally get laid. I have volunteered for George Bush Sr.'s scorched earth election presidential campaign against the hapless Michael Dukakis, laughing along with Bush's racist, hysterical Willie Horton commercials and all they imply about the liberal Massachusetts Greek. Compassion, after all, is a virtue only rich Americans can afford. Tolerance, the purview of slick Manhattanites who already have everything I want. I am invited to attend what is sure to be a Republican victory party at the Marriott Marquis, the ugly slab of a building near Times Square. The invitation to the party features a scornful cartoon of the big-eared Dukakis sticking his head out of an M1 Abrams tank, the most unfortunate photo op of the campaign. And I expect an evening of arrogant crowing, of being pressed to the bosom of my fellow conservatives while dancing a Protestant hora over the grave of American liberalism. Yes, tonight is a very special night. It is the night I'm to meet a Republican girl from a clean white home. Her name will be Jane. Jane Carruthers, let's say. Hi, Jane. I'm Gary Shteyngart from Little Neck, Queens. My family owns a colonial worth $280,000 US. I'm the brains behind a Commodore 64 program called the Family Real Estate Transaction Calculator. I go to Stuyvesant High School where my grades aren't so great, but I hope to get into the Honors College at the University of Michigan. I guess tonight it's going to be curtains for the governor of Massachusetts. I enter the ballroom, a dark, gap-toothed immigrant wearing sweat socks and my special and only suit, a highly flammable polyester number. I navigate the room filled with sparkling Anglo-Americans clutching single malts without a word said in my direction, without a pair of happy blue eyes reflecting the gray sheen of the crisp nylon tie I had picked up for $2 from a Broadway vendor. As George Herbert Walker Bush racks up state after state on the big screen above us, as cheers and laughter circulate around the massively hideous ballroom, I stand alone in a corner, biting down on my plastic cup filled with ginger ale and swatting the colorful balloons that seem to have an affinity for my static-inducing polyester. Until a pair of teenage blonde lovelies, the girls I've been waiting for all my life, finally approach me with needy smiles on their faces, one of them beckoning for me to come hither with her hand. I'm so excited. I somehow fail to see myself for what I am, a short teenage boy born to a failing superpower, trapped inside a shiny gunmetal jacket, carrying about a mop of the darkest hair in the room, darker even than Michael Dukakis's Hellenic dew. Which one will be my Jane? Which one will trace the W of my weak chin with her pewter fingers? Which one will take me on her boat and introduce me to the millionaire and his wife? You know something, Daddy? Gary survived communist Russia just so he could join the GOP. I think that's very courageous, son. Would you like to throw the old pigskin around with me and Jack Kemp after cocktails? Just leave your topsiders in the mudroom. Hey, one of the lovelies says, me, debonair, unconcerned. Hey. So I'll have a rum and Coke, just a splash of ice and a lime. Mandy, you said no ice, right? She'll have a Diet Coke, lime, no ice. I have been mistaken for the waiter. And the next day I'm a Democrat. Unbelievable. I could have been in the Tea Party by now. Just one wrong move, and that's how you lose him. Well, I thought I'd stray away from politics for the last section and just backtrack to our very first days in America. You know, coming to this country in 1979 from the former Soviet Union, it wasn't just crossing 8 time zones. It was like being teleported to a different and much better planet. A lot of it felt like pure science fiction. You were in advanced civilization. I saw my first Chevrolet Corvette and thought it was an airplane, just without the wings. So this is the beginning of our arrival in this country. The first momentous thing that happens to me in Kew Gardens, Queens, is that I fall in love with cereal boxes. We are too poor to afford toys at this point, but we do have to eat. Cereal is food, sort of. It tastes grainy, easy, and light, with a hint of false fruitiness. It tastes the way America feels. I am obsessed with the fact that many cereal boxes come with prizes inside, which seem to me an unprecedented miracle, something for nothing. My favorite comes in a box of a cereal called Honeycombs, a box featuring a healthy, freckled white kid whom I begin to see as an important role model, on a bike flying through the sky. What you get inside each box of Honeycombs are small license plates to be tied to the rear of your bicycle. The license plates are much smaller than the real thing, but they have a nice metallic heft to them. I keep getting Michigan, a very simple plate, white letters on a black base. I trace the words with my fingers. I speak it aloud, getting most of the sounds wrong. Michigan. What I need now, in a very serious way, is to get an actual bike. In America, the distance between wanting something and then having it delivered right to your living room is not terribly great. I want a bike, so some rich American neighbor, they're all unspeakably rich, gives me a bike. A rusted red monstrosity with the spokes coming dangerously undone, but hey. I tied the license plate to the bicycle and I spend most of my day wondering which plate to use, citrus sunny Florida or snowy Vermont. This is what America is about, endless, endless choice. I don't have much choice in pals, but there's a one-eyed girl in our building complex whom I've sort of befriended. She's tiny and scrappy and poor just like us. We're suspicious of each other at first, but I'm an immigrant and she has one eye, so we're even. The girl rides around on a half-broken bike just like mine, and she keeps falling and scraping herself. Rumor is that's how she lost her eye. And bawling whenever her palms get bloodied, her blonde head raised up to the sky. One day she sees me riding my banged-up bicycle with the Honeycomb's license plate clanging behind me, and she screams, "Michigan, Michigan!" And I ride ahead, smiling and tooting my bike horn, proud of the English letters that are attached somewhere below my ass. "Michigan, Michigan," she screams. Michigan, with its bluish-black license plate, the color of my friend's remaining eye. Michigan, with its delicious American name. Michigan. How lucky one must be to live there. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. Thank you. That's nice. Yes, well, I am very happy to take your questions, your concerns, anything. And I can answer very personal questions. I have, once you write a memoir, there's no turning back. The first interview I had was with the wonderful writer Francine Prose, and it was for Interview Magazine, and she said, "I know you better than my husband Howie of 20 years. So there's nothing to, sure. You know. I have a license plate that says, ask me about my late-in-life circumcision. So really, there's nothing to fear. Oh, good, yes, wonderful.
When I read your book, Super Sad True Love Story, loved the parents in the book, and then when I read your memoir, and I realized that they were based on your real parents, and I got to know them. So could you talk a little bit about that? And and in the memoir, when you took them back to Russia,
Right.
I thought that was really great.
Thank you so much. Many people have noticed that the parents in Super Sad True Love Story, my previous book, and the parents in the Russian Debutante's Hand Job or whatever, are somewhat similar to the parents of Little Failure. And they ask, why is that so? I don't really have an imagination. I don't know what I'm doing. So for Super Sad, I basically took my parents, and then there's the scientific part of the book. That part was outsourced to India almost entirely. In fact, parts of this book were also written in India. You're wondering why, there's a woman in Leningrad, and all of a sudden she's wearing a sari in the middle of December. That's because Rajiv in Bangalore wrote from his own life. In writing this book, I set out with certain ideas about my parents. And I think in my teens and 20s and early 30s, there was an anger I felt toward them that I think many immigrant children feel, which is the anger of, why can't I have parents who are not this harsh and this demanding? The term little failure was invented by my mother after she had gone to see my 100-square-foot apartment on the yet ungentrified Lower East Side where I was living, an apartment I shared with a water bug about the size of me. Hank was his name. And she, and I was supposed to go to law school like most immigrant kids or medical school, and she walked in, saw me and the bug hanging out, and she said, you are a little failure, my friend. And those things used to hurt. But in writing this memoir, whatever feelings of anger I'd ever harbored became feelings of sadness, not for me, but for them. Because throughout the book, and it ends with me taking them back to Leningrad or St. Petersburg or Leninsburg or whatever the hell they call it now, the feelings of sadness that they never got to be what they wanted to be. My father wanted to be an opera singer, but after the Six-Day War in 1967, a huge spate of state-sanctioned anti-Semitism was launched in Russia, and it was not, a Jewish opera singer was not exactly in the cards. And both of them suffered tremendously in ways I never have. My father's first memories of growing up were being evacuated from Leningrad as the Luftwaffe, the Germans, attacked, hiding under a train as the train was being bombed, his best friend dying at age 3 of some unspecified disease, and then being told that his own father was killed when he was age 5. His own father was killed outside of Leningrad when they were trying to break through the siege of Leningrad. Those are his first 3 memories. My mother has an entire album entitled, Uncle So-and-so and Family Buried Alive, Belarusia, 1941. So these aren't Cape Cod, vacation pics. And I knew this about them, but I never quite could link their past to who they are as people, because you never see your parents that way. You just see them as these big hulking creatures above you, and you are their little failure. And in taking them back and in talking to them, the end of this memoir is so different from what I envisioned starting out. I don't believe that writing books, even memoirs, should be therapeutic. I mean, it's work and it's artistry, and it shouldn't be any of that. But I think I learned enough about them to really reconsider their lives, but also my life as well. Oh, yeah.
So I'm curious if there were particular Russian authors who ended up being influential for you. There must have been some moment when, in college or whatever,
right,
when you went back and read them. And, I think of Gogol in particular, but I'm just curious about what kind
right,
of influence that might have had.
Right. Well, there's a funny anecdote about that. So in Russia, kids really read. You're supposed to memorize Pushkin by age 4 and move on from there. So I was quite a laggard when I went to Hebrew school, and my parents did not allow English in the house, and no television either. Spring break. So outside the house, literally spring break. Outside the house, you had the A-Team and Buck Rogers. Inside it was all Lady with Lapdog. And I remember my father going to a PTA meeting in Hebrew school, and the teacher said, we hear Gary reads Dostoevsky in the original. And my father said, no, only Chekhov. I started reading immediately, and being asthmatic, of course, that was a big thing because you couldn't leave the house. And one of the first things I read, interestingly enough, was a certain Mark Twain, an American writer, Mark Twain, in Russian, Tom Sawyer, okay, and his friend Geckleberry Finn. Books that had an intro by Joseph Stalin talking about, his love of Mark Twain and how he probably should be purged as well, but, he's dead. And I remember the Mississippi was as far away from my existence as could be imagined, but it hit a chord. There was something incredible about the colloquial nature of it. I remember looking at Becky Thatcher and just falling in love with her. And then as I grew older, we got a television set. And that was the beginning of the end for my intellectual life for a while. First, what happened was that my grandmother got a television set from the 1950s, one of the first sets probably ever made. It got either picture or sound, but never at once. And you had to hold an antenna out the window. So it was good. I got fresh air and exercise, for one arm anyway. So I would watch a TV show, and I would see what the picture was. And then when they reran it, I would write down the dialogue, and so the next time the picture came back, I could match picture and sound. So in a way, it was a writer's exercise to that as well. But I was just shocked by it, because the shows didn't make any sense. Gilligan's Island, I kept thinking, how does a country as rich and powerful as America not be able to find one of its finest citizens, the millionaire? How hard can it be, And his wife. Marianne, I can understand. They get lost at sea all the time. So after a while, I did decide, and it was around when I attended the Oberlin Institute for Special People in Ohio. And their writing was cool. Actually, their being an immigrant was cool also. So many years spent trying to cover my Russian accent, trying to learn, practicing in front of the mirror. All of a sudden I show up at Oberlin and I'm wearing a Cossack outfit with all the bullets, You couldn't be more ethnic at Oberlin, And that's when I started writing my first novel quite seriously. And that's when I really started to read books very seriously. And I think the Russian writer that was most influential, just because he was such a craftsperson when it came to prose, was Vladimir Nabokov, and I'm thankful that you mentioned Lolita. I remember just reading those books and thinking, my God, you can do this in English with a Russian soundtrack in the back of your mind. That was something really quite beautiful. And then I read Portnoy's Complaint, and I thought, my God, you can write about Judaism and sex like that as well. And all those things kind of fused together into the monstrous tomes you see today that I've been producing, like GMO modified crops. And now that I teach in Columbia, that what I say the most to students starting out is, okay, writing's fine, but it's reading. You can't become a writer without reading more than you've ever read in your life, And as I mentioned before, there's this terrible imbalance because now there are 183,000 writers in America, and there's 1,200 readers, mostly in the Cambridge area, And so there's the supply and demand problem. Remember Economics 101? So I tell them the best thing you can do is to read. And in some ways, I enjoy reading more than I enjoy writing. I mean, I have to write, that's what I do for a living, but when I'm in the country and my iTelephone doesn't work because AT&T is not sophisticated enough to have, upstate New York telephone communications, and when I'm just sitting there reading, that's when I think I'm happiest. Having some cognac helps as well.
I want to keep this open-ended. Respond however you want to respond, but Russia today is a very different nation than when you left it, and I just wanted to hear your impressions, or do you think about it? What do you think about it?
What do I think about Russia? Well, I go back almost every year. I need to suffer for my work, and that always comes up in Russia. The wonderful thing about Russia is that it kind of remains the same. It's always been somewhat of a disaster, and it continues to be that. There's a restaurant in St. Petersburg called 1913, and I asked the owner, why 1913? And she said, well, that was the only good year in Russian history, So when things happen, when certain peninsulas get annexed, what are you going to do? I mean, the country's always functioned like that. And there's always been, and America has some of this complex as well, but it's even more so in Russia, this need for grandeur, this need to be part of something that's much bigger than life, even though most people have miserable lives. I was in a taxi cab in Moscow a few years ago, and the driver was literally crying. He was drunk and trying to drive me to the airport, and crying and saying, I can't make ends meet. I have to move to the United States. And I said, well, what's doing really well now is Canada. Canada's doing great, and they're always looking for new immigrants. And he said, pooh, I can only live in a superpower. And that, in a nutshell, is everything that's wrong with Russia. But, my books this hasn't been translated, but the novels have been translated, and the reception has been amazing. I can try to think of one of the reviews. Balding traitor betrays motherland. That was a good one, actually. Shteyngart pleases his American masters. So it's always good to come home.
Did you evolve into a humor writer, or did you have a particular event that happened that a giant laugh you got somewhere, or how did you sort of gravitate toward humor?
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's a good question. My circumcision was so funny that everyone just cracked up, and I said, I see a future for myself. And ouch. Sorry. Where I was before, they weren't keen into circumcision jokes, so I'm trying to make up for that. You never know about Vassar. No, actually, they were keen on circumcision jokes. The humor began for my parents and my grandparents. My father is a very funny man. He used to invent this series of stories he used to tell me when we emigrated to America called The Planet of the Yids. That was his story. And it was set in outer space where an entirely Jewish planet was surrounded by Slavs who kept bombing it with pork torpedoes. You know? So that was the beginning of sort of satire. But it was always like that. You know, I remember growing up, Brezhnev was the leader. All these jokes about Brezhnev. We just had the Sochi Olympics, so this is kind of on the same time. 1980, it's the Moscow Olympics, right? And Brezhnev has to give the opening ceremony speech the way Putin did. And he's barely alive at this point. He's about to die a year later, and he climbs up to the stage for the speech, and he starts reading, completely senile. And he says, "Oh, oh, oh, oh." And his assistant runs up and says, "Comrade General Secretary, those are just the Olympic rings." So you're 5 years old and you're starting out with humor like that, you know, which is engaging, performative, the whole family's into it, you know. So I think humor was never not an option. You know, this book relies somewhat less on humor. It's not a satire, it's a memoir. And that felt weird to write that. You felt like you weren't on the same kind of, you were walking on a bit of a tightrope, without the sort of safety net of humor beneath you. So you couldn't always make everything into a joke because some of this stuff, you know, isn't that funny. But I think when I write, I think fiction and nonfiction, I think they should be entertaining. And many literary writers don't feel that way. Entire parts of Brooklyn would disagree with that statement. But I don't think writing should be, it can be, you know, theoretical and abstract, but I want people to enjoy it as well. And that's what I think literature does. It creates this it's this ultimate technology at a time when we keep hyping the latest app, and hey, I Uber like the best of them, you know. But it's this weird technology where you pick up a book, you open it, and all of a sudden you enter the consciousness of another human being. So all of a sudden you're a Nigerian cab driver in London. Something you never thought of, never could imagine. You enter somebody's consciousness. And when you do it in a book like this, there are no interruptions. And you stay there for as long as you need to, and then the magic spell is broken. And I think there's just nothing like that to this day, no matter what they'll invent next. And hey, I've tried Google Glass, so I know.
When I was reading Super Sad True Love Story, I was struck by how cinematic it was as a narrative, and I found myself trying to cast it as I went as to who could play the roles, which I found interesting. You folded in to the end of the film, end of the book anyway, and I was wondering whether cinema and that kind of imagery plays a role in how you write.
Sure, that's a good point. No, I am obviously. You know, once I did get that television with the Gilligan's Island, there was no turning back, and I had discovered the importance of film. I mean, we tell storytelling. Storytelling now is, whether it's books, there's this interesting kind of crossover, you know, so many books feel cinematic, but the really dominant art form of our time, bizarrely enough, is television. Shows like The Sopranos and The Wire and True Detective and Girls and whatever, all this stuff. And that actually borrows from the novel more than film does. You know what I mean? The Wire is a Dickensian tale. The Sopranos can feel like Flaubert at times, where you meet every single element of the society. Fascinating to think that, the way we've borrowed from each other. Super Sad, they are trying, 90 miles to the south of us to turn it into a television series. And casting does come up. And I always thought the funny thing, so Lenny Abramov is this 39-year-old who looks like he's 50, and then there's his boss he works for this immortality place called Post-Human Services, and his boss is Joshi, who's 74 but looks like he's 21. So I always thought Lenny should be Paul Giamatti, and Joshi should be James Franco. Wouldn't that be amazing? That's my dream. That's actually the last thing I want out of life, and I think I can just stop.
If you came to America today, what do you think your equivalent of the license plates in the cereal box would be as a form of American freedom, but also like overabundance and choice?
Freedom, but overabundance and choice would have to be Twitter. And you know this because we've just tweeted with each other pretty good. Ever since I landed in Santa Barbara, I've been doing a lot of tweeting. This seems to be a very tweet-friendly place. It's exactly that. It's the idea that, the license plate was a way for me to express myself. Well, today am I going to have, Vermont or Wisconsin, Dairy State, or, this was a way of expressing myself. And now you do it, in the most obnoxious way possible, which is Twitter. It's amazing. I mean, half the writers I know are on this thing. Joyce Carol Oates gives a mean tweet, And it's interesting. I mean, we're all in this digital playground now. My kid is 6 months old, and I wonder how he will, what his relationship with books will be, for example, when it is doubtful that books will, when he comes of age, when he goes to college, will even exist in this form. It's certainly very doubtful. But yeah, Twitter, there is a kind of freedom to it, But there's also this kind of instant gratification. I'll tweet out a picture of my adorable dachshund, and 10 people will like it, and immediately I'll feel good. That's the kind of feeling I used to get after publishing a novel every 4 years, But now it's instant, and that dilutes my need to publish more books. So there's freedom, but somewhere in Northern California, there's a hotel where you have to pay like $1,000 because there's no connection at all. There's some kind of sin. I think it's probably in your Big Sur, under Big Sur, but I want to go there someday, on someone's expense account.